10 years ago, the Turning the Tide team at the Quakers produced the first edition of this film, Nonviolence for Change. It's been viewed all around the world and has been a great help in preparing people for protest. Now we have updated the film, condensing the original and adding a new section at the end which explores changes in how we protest, what we protest about, and the way authorities react to non-violent protest.
Mother Earth, forgive us, we are asphyxiating the generations to come.
I swear by the lake on the mountain. I swear by blood that's red. I swear on the cool, clear night air.
Hello, Mum.
I swear on my child's head that I will never rest until all oppression is ended. And I will never rest until all oppression is dead. I swear to the tigers and the forests. I swear to the whales and the seas. I swear on the life-giving, living earth with all the passion in me that I will never rest.
Non-violent protest is all about actively challenging and changing injustice. But there is no single definition of what active non-violence is. This short film seeks to stimulate debate and to get people to question where they stand on the issues it raises. There is a long and noble tradition of active non-violence, from Gandhi and Martin Luther King to the suffragettes and the Quakers to road protesters and anti-Trident campaigners. To understand the complexities of the issues, we followed 3 campaigners with very different backgrounds and experiences. Ellen Moxley is a Quaker and a lifelong peace campaigner. In June 1999, after 6 months of planning, she joined 2 other campaigners in doing £80,000 worth of damage to a nuclear missile programme. After 4.5 months in prison, she was found not guilty.
Nonviolence involves everything from supporting somebody on the sidelines at a blockade, being their legal observer, to actually doing direct damage to a nuclear installation.
Martin Shaw is a full-time activist. He's pulled up GM crops and was involved in the planning of the protest at Seattle against the World Trade Organization, and in September 2000 played a key role in Prague, helping coordinate the thousands of people who took part in the direct action against the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
Direct action is so much more than just about taking action in the political process. It's all about the food we eat, the place we go on holiday, how we transport and how we communicate amongst ourselves, and the entertainment we have. It's about taking control of your life.
After leaving college, Alison Matthias joined the campaigning organisation People and Planet. She wants to create change and is looking at direct action as a way to achieve this, but has been discouraged by the media's portrayal of violence that often surrounds protest.
The reason why I chose to get involved in campaigns and to get active and to learn more about non-violent direct action is because I receive so much information about all the things that take place in the world, and so much of it makes me upset. And with this knowledge, I want to be able to do something positive to make a change.
And if there's an injustice in Turkey for the Kurdish people, it's my injustice. And if they've got tears to shed, then I've got tears to shed with them.
So what is active non-violence? Well, it includes everything from lifestyle to protest. Letter writing, vigils, marching and criminal damage can all play a part. Protests come in all shapes and sizes. They might focus on raising awareness about an injustice. They might be an active attempt to physically prevent an injustice, or they might be a massive event that captures both ideas. And this is the sort of protest that took place in Prague in September 2000. The protests in Prague were part of a growing movement against globalization, international finance institutions, and the corporate takeover of society.
We'll shut them down. We'll shut them down. We will shut them down.
We want to do this non-violently for many reasons. A, because if we were violent against the Czech police, they could be very, very, very violent back to us. But B, I don't think it's necessary or it's particularly helpful to use violence in this situation. And we get our point across much better if we show that our strength comes from the strength of numbers and the strength of people's feeling and the unity of our feeling against this. And we don't actually have to use violence. And we don't want to.
The protest in Prague climaxed with several marches converging on the conference centre. While the vast majority of the thousands of people that turned up were non-violent, some ended up in violent confrontations with the police. This has been justified as a legitimate tactic, but has helped divide opinion among protesters.
To campaign for a peace and just society by using gratuitous violence, I think, is counterproductive and won't, in the end, achieve our aims.
If I saw a protest that was taking place that was violent, I wouldn't have any respect for the people involved in it.
Today, on the 26th, the police have been targeted by stone. Behind the police, I think they are human beings, and I don't want to hurt them. And you can see that it's just a cycle of violence. If you use violence, you will have a violent answer.
To create change, you need to bring people along with you, so you need to be able to communicate effectively with them. The media is one vehicle for this. So how do you ensure that the message is portrayed as you want, without the negative impressions that violence can bring?
I think it's really important for the people watching as well, these protests on telly and seeing it in the newspaper, seeing that we are lively, happy people, and we're not here, we're not violent anarchists trying to smash the place up. It's not about that.
Well, independent media needs to be here, mainly because mainstream media ignores most of what direct action is.
Well, I think the protesters are in a difficult position in one sense, which is that if you want to get your message across into the mainstream printed press, it's probably not going to get in unless there's some sort of friction, some sort of flashpoint, because that's what news is about.
But the media constantly concentrate on sensationalist burning or any fights with police, which are a very small part of any sort of protest. So we're here to give an alternative side of the story.
We have to be cynical about this. The truth is that there will have to be a certain amount of friction, in inverted commas, violence.
Can everybody move this way? Thank you.
We'll shut them down. We'll shut them down.
So we've just had definite 100% confirmation from the President's office that the meeting is cancelled tomorrow. I repeat, the meeting is cancelled tomorrow.
We will shut them down.
Stone throwing gave the perfect excuse for the police to charge and to come out onto the demonstrators.
People who are engaging in protest have to think of what effect their protest is going to have. Is it going to make the police think about what they're doing? Is it going to make their actions less violent?
It's not only morally wrong, but it also doesn't help you in any way in your direct action. It didn't bring the aim of the direct action any closer, I think.
It's a very, very complicated argument because in Prague, in my opinion, the violence worked in the short term. The meeting was shut down because of the violence.
Opinions within the protest movement differ over whether violence to people or property damage can ever be acceptable.
I think violence against people is never okay, in any case. Violence against private property or goods can be okay, I think, if you do it in a very open, controlled, transparent manner, no?
I think today, when a lot of direct action includes economic damage, whether that's the destruction of a hawk jet or a field of genetically modified food, I think it has a part to play. I think the thing is that my feeling is it shouldn't be something that's random, it should be targeted and specific.
There are loads of contradictions. You can have people wearing masks smashing up at McDonald's, and that's wrong. And then you'll have people dismantling a hawk air jet, and that seems to be okay, but they're both damages to private property.
It's up to the individual concerned to take action in a way that they feel is appropriate and that they feel comfortable with. I've done some accountable actions that were so inspiring. I've been inside warehouses of military vehicles that were being sent to Indonesia, and we daubed them with slogans saying "Not for sale to Indonesia." And the feeling of being really comfortable with a group of people and going in and doing something together was absolutely inspiring.
Direct action is often necessary when the laws of the land are not protecting either the environment, social well-being, or people's rights.
The protests against nuclear weapons have long been associated with non-violence, and the emergence of the Trident Ploughshares campaign has seen a dramatic rise in a number of people taking non-violent and accountable action against the weapons system.
We went to this platform, which was in the middle of Loch Goyle, and then discovered that there was a metal ladder, and that we could climb up this metal ladder. So we hitched the boat to this ladder and we climbed up. We knew that this station was used for the sonic testing of Trident, And Trident has to be totally invisible sonically, of course, and so we had got up on the Defense Evaluation and Research Agency website that this station was very important for Trident. We managed to find a window to the laboratory open. So Angie and Ulla went in and they began to hand out these machines through another window to me. And so faxes, computers, screens, telephones all went into the drink. And so we totally emptied the laboratory, having hung banners, first of all, saying that we were Trident plowshares, and also laying out our leaflets and pictures of Hiroshima on the table. And so one of the witnesses said the laboratory had been totally sanitized, except that we left the first aid cabinet and the life rings, of course, and the drinking fountain, which were not life-threatening. I felt that the very fact that we were bringing the whole Trident question into the courts and finally into the High Court was a marvellous, marvellous process.
This Monday I'm going to be going up to Faslane in Scotland. There's a Trident nuclear submarine base there, and we're just going to protest outside it and block the base for the day. It hasn't really crossed my mind concerns that it'll turn violent at all, because the guidelines that I've read have specified quite clearly that this is a non-violent protest and that people coming along are requested to obey certain rules.
It's terribly, terribly important for people to understand what their motivations are for getting into this sort of thing, that they realize that, that they need to remain non-violent at all times.
And training is an important part in developing this sort of understanding. There are different sorts of training, long-term analysis and short-term tactics, and both are vital to the sustainability and effectiveness of a campaign.
The day before we travel up, there will be non-violent training at a friend's meeting house.
So we just demonstrate what's the difference between not being limp.
So if the police is just about to track you away from the blockade, you can choose to be stiff, and then it's quite easy for the police to lift you up and carry you away. But then if you don't want to leave the blockade, then you might choose to go limp instead when the police is just about to trap you. And then it's very, very difficult for the police to get hold of you and to track you away.
Make sure you've got your midriff covered.
I think a lot of it has to do with actually feeling comfortable with what you're doing and being prepared to deal with different situations and working together as a group so you can make decisions together and look out for each other. And I think that's why training is important. It's not just knowing about the issues that you're involved in, but actually preparing yourself to deal with situations in a manner that's sensible and focused, rather than just getting frightened and running away or frightened and throwing something. And personally, I feel that everyone should go through some kind of training at some point.
These people are the blockaders and you're the police. And are you...
no, very small police. I can...
Okay, just let them in. Anybody got some water?
Are we done? Yes. Let's debrief this and let's talk about it. You want to sit down while we do it? Yeah. Really learned a lot from that. I hadn't thought about this clumping together and hanging on to, you know, for dear life. That is a super idea.
Normally it's very difficult blockade to break. So if you're planning with your affinity group to link arms, you should agree with a password that you can say when you want the others to let you go if you're in pain or something like that.
So whatever you do, you should be there in your dignity.
Yeah, and be courteous. Yeah.
And look for the eye contact. Look at person to person. Like I'm here. I'm not hitting you, but I'm here because I think this is important what I'm doing here, and I respect you as a person.
Well, I've come all the way to Faslane to help out at the big blockade outside the Trident base and to stop it for the whole day.
Here we are on another action.
I've like found an important role to play within the group, and I've got a really nice affinity group, and we spent all day yesterday just like bonding and talking about plans, and it's just lovely.
The affinity groups, yes, that's one of the basic principles of Trident Plowshares, to work in affinity groups. It's because there are a whole variety of roles needed for this work, and we also need to be supported and not feel as if we're out on a limb doing something that's totally eccentric, but that we have a group of people who understand why we're doing what we're doing and are prepared to be legal observers, support people, give us hot drinks, that sort of thing. And we take turns as well in being arrestable or not.
Off the road, chaps.
Okay, we'll just in front of this car.
Twice the wall.
I'm going to be a legal observer for the day, so just recording anything that happens and what time it happens when people get arrested.
That was the quickest action in the history of the world. This is the biggest nuclear dump of arms in the whole of Europe, and it's essential that we campaign against it, really, because these weapons are just absolutely unnecessary and shouldn't be here, and this is a fantastically wonderful non-violent action that anybody can come along and get involved in. Good training yesterday, and then lots of nice atmosphere this morning.
Sales, do something like that. You take it over that, you need.
Well, my main purpose today was to support my mum, who is a veteran campaigner, and I'm very happy for her to break the law, but at the moment with my employment situation I don't want to break the law, so I support her I was her legal observer today.
The fact that a few people are willing to put their freedom and possibly their safety on the line to do this sort of thing actually makes other people sit up and think and say, why are they doing this? I better find out more about Trident. Maybe I could go on such and such a vigil or such and such a blockade. That's effectiveness. It's the circles in the water, you know, expanding outwards.
It's important for groups to discuss how they will measure their success. Is it in column inches, disruption, or parliamentary change?
Change happens when you've got a parliamentary process but also an extra parliamentary process. I believe that the whole principle of direct action is a really key part of our democracy, and that we lose that at our peril.
I would think this is democracy and work here, because the government is disobeying international law.
Change takes time, but we're part of that process and we feel confident about it.
If you don't wish to be arrested, stand up and leave the roadway, please. Quite busy down here. It's quite dangerous carrying.
It's important, I think, not to remember that our ends have to be consonant with the means have to be consonant with the end, and that we have to, if we want a peaceful outcome, we have to use peaceful means.
The young ones all.
Don't you know me? I'm one of the Trident 3.
Oh, are you?
Yeah,
sorry.
This
is the first time I've been down here. So
right.
So you're famous?
Well, I have to.
Yeah, but the whole atmosphere of this particular campaign is just totally nonviolent. The police realise that, everybody realises that. It's all very peaceful and relaxed and great, so it's crucial.
We want a peaceful world, and the only way we can get that is through peaceful means, I think. And the only way that you're going to get people to listen to you is by treating them with respect.
If you want to affect change and you use violence, then you can certainly expect that whatever world you live in afterwards will be a violent world. What goes around comes around, simple as that.
In the 10 years since this film was first shown, an awful lot has happened. Protest has changed. So we are now going to look at some of the same questions that the original film raised and see whether we get the same answers. Is non-violent protest still acceptable? Can it achieve the change we want to see? The focus of much non-violent protest has altered, from international financial institutions and nuclear weapons, and on to cuts and climate change. Some of these protests have attracted high-profile speakers.
How on earth did we create an economy which is not only socially unjust, but environmentally unsustainable?
I think we need to pledge here, today, now, that we will build the country's largest ever campaign of non-violent direct action and civil disobedience to make our politicians act.
Peaceful direct action is even more important now than it was 10 years ago, I think. That when you look at the threat of climate change, the urgency of action means I think we have to use every single tool that is available to us in a democracy to act peacefully for change. Marches play a role, and it's hugely important that people are here today. But actually, we can't just go on marching once a year and thinking that's going to bring about real change. What we have to do is to be prepared, I think, for peaceful direct action.
When millions took to the streets in 2003 to march against war in Iraq, many felt their voices were ignored. But others believe these actions can, and often do, bring about change in ways that is not always predictable.
After the march against the war in Iraq, and nothing happened, nothing changed, we were totally ignored. We felt as if we were living in a real militarist society, and that we had absolutely no voice at all in what was happening. So I don't really believe in big marches anymore.
I think the anti-war movement is trapped in very ineffective dance with the state, and the state says you can have your protests if we have our war. And as soon as you cross that line with non-violent resistance, then the dance is over. And I really believe actions like ploughshares and also non-cooperation within the military are the most effective actions to take. I believe if 1% of the people who marched against the war in 2003 had gone into non-violent direct resistance in the spirit of Catonsville and ploughshares, and Gandhi and King, and went to jail for their resistance, and 99% who marched in 2003 had proactively supported them with proactive solidarity, dealt with hysterical parents, helped feed the cat and pay the rent, we would have had an effective anti-war movement.
Doing more than marching, climate change campaigners have been using direct action to establish camps that have provided a space to share information and train for further action.
We are currently in a blockaded street in the heart of the City of London. We're on Bishopsgate. There is a climate camp going on around us as we speak. We've essentially occupied this space and created an alternative, sustainable community of protest here. So there's compost toilets going up, there's a farmer's market stall, you know, locally produced food, etc. So we're trying to demonstrate the alternatives to the system by taking it to the system. In the face of extreme provocation from the police, all of the people at the climate camp have always been doggedly peaceful, because we know that we're not going to achieve our aims without it.
I've actually been following a little bit of the media. It's just reaching here this morning because things are so immediate now, and I actually saw it was a West End final in the Evening Standard where people were actually being dragged down the street covered in blood. That has made the headline news. There's been no mention yet in the mainstream media of this particularly peaceful protests where the views are here to be heard. Anyone that's not involved in a protest will just see those very, the few elements that come down to violence. And if those elements didn't exist, would the protest get any recognition at all?
From what I understand, we're being searched for weapons, anything sharp, including wit and...
You said that, not me.
It's kind of a game we play. You know, they come out to every protest and they play with us. And it's just a question that I have. What would happen if the police weren't here? You know?
Yeah.
What would we really do?
Right.
As protesters, other than demonstrate the way that we're going to demonstrate creatively and otherwise.
There we go. Lovely. Thank you very much, sir.
You couldn't have gone through that.
I did. I felt for things. Well, obviously I'm searching for weapons. Okay. You don't normally find weapons that are nice and spongy.
Fair enough.
a lot of violent protest commingled with this allows the media to portray protesters as violent and kind of shirk aside every other reason that people come here.
Reporting environmental protests or social justice events, we've noticed that the police are using terrorist laws to control what we're doing and control what many protests.
Some police techniques that were highlighted by images from the G20 show how they can impede protests but also make their own job of policing much harder.
I think the government have used 9/11 as an excuse for tightening up the laws which affect people's right to protest. And when you get big crowds, they kettle them so people can't escape, which is absolutely wrong. It's a form of detention without trial. Then there are all the control orders and so on. And I think it has been intended to frighten people off demonstration, but actually it's intensified the commitment of people who want to see justice.
I think it's a mistake to trap completely non-violent demonstrators in a group with people who may have other intentions. I think it's a mistake to trap people and make them more fearful, more resentful, more angry.
An important way of dealing with the fear that this policing can cause is through non-violence training.
They picked on each end, so how did it feel for people that were in the middle?
What's kept coming out of today was the importance of preparation. I think the participants are flagging that up. You know, if they're just thrown into something, then there's more potential for things to go wrong, and how important it is to think of all possible scenarios and just practice them in a safe place, and also about getting to know each other, working in affinity groups. It's all about preparation. But you are protesters, you're blockading, you're prepared to be arrested. These are the police, so just one-on-one for the moment, okay? Off you go.
We know what to do! Come back, say young do! We know what to do!
And a question remains. Where does active non-violence end and actual violence begin? Because as Martin makes clear, non-violence is not about being passive. Certainly at the climate camp blockading the Kingsnorth power station in 2008.
The other day I was involved in pushing the police off-site, and there was an incredible level of discipline and coordination without any planning, as far as I know, that we were going to be actively resistant, but not aggressive.
It seems like the non-violent movement is maturing, developing into something more than just a group of committed protesters and into a real community that is looking out for everyone. Just seeing the spectacle of the confined crowd at the G20, hands in the air chanting, "This is not a riot," is evidence of a real awareness of the importance of non-violence. And that reaction would not have been believed had it not been for the multitude of citizen journalists and campaigners with cameras.
And what was fascinating at the G20 in particular was seeing how every citizen or demonstrator or journalist armed with a mobile phone and its camera is now a walking CCTV camera. And the police who have so welcomed additional surveillance and championed it are now finding that surveillance is a two-way street.
Thames Valley Police has an obligation to facilitate peaceful protest under Articles 8, 10 and 11 of the European Convention of Human Rights.
Non-violent protest is not just a legitimate way to create change, it's a very necessary way to attempt to create change. Without dissent, without protest, without discussion, without debate, democracy will stultify, democracy will die.
The attitude of government towards all demonstrations is very different and more hostile, and so it makes it more important to keep up the demonstrations and not be frightened by them.
I'm really clear that the history of the world has always needed non-violent protests. It's one of the most effective ways of drawing attention to a cause. It's where people put their principles above practical things. It often is the most effective way of influencing the public or the political debate.
And we need to keep struggling. There's such massive problems going on in the world, when you have that kind of knowledge and you choose to ignore it, then you're guilty of a great crime as far as I'm concerned. You're guilty of ignoring the possibility of change, which I think we all have within us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a great night.